We just have scratched the surface in the last hour of the amazing and horrific world of stalking. And it's gotten into like a grand level of stalking. Welcome back. This is F. Daniel. This is our WWCR broadcast, also broadcasting on the internet, also international podcast to come. All this is happening, and so we will be bringing this to you via high quality podcast. And I guess I need to get right into it. And the first thing I need to do is talk about Dr. Hall. John Hall has been our guest. He's the author of A New Breed. He is an anesthesiologist in Texas. He's fairly esteemed in the medical profession. He went through an extraordinary experience, which he documents in A New Breed. I have a link to that on the site. And it just gives a personal experience. And really what he's doing in this book is what we all need to be doing. Anyone who is stalked or targeted in any way needs to be documenting all of these things. So he documented it in a book. And I have something to say about that when we get them on. And then Dr. Robert Duncan holds degrees from Harvard and Dartmouth and many other universities. His expertise is directed energy, neurological weapons, psychological information warfare. His movie is called The Enemy Within, Psychic Warfare. And I haven't seen this book, but he has another book called Hacking the Human Mind, I believe. He is able to discuss directed energy, neurological weapons. He's done work in the medical profession, the medical field, and actually really use of electronics in a positive way in keeping doctors out of harm's way so they can treat people that are wounded in the field. But I mean, just a really fascinating. He knows all about MK Ultra, when it began, the whole history of this. I guess he's kind of the go-to guy when you want to understand the electronic warfare aspect of all this. Now, let me see who I've got on the air. If all goes well, I'll have both of our guests here, Dr. John Hall and Dr. Robert Duncan. Are you there, both of you? Hello.
Yes, Dr. Robert Duncan's here.
Okay. Well, nice to hear you. I've just heard a lot of interviews with you, and we don't have Dr. John Hall there. Is that correct? So I guess let's see if we can go ahead and fix that. I'm going to have to call him live again. I thought we had him on the phone. So let me just go ahead and this is what happens. So WWCR, this is what happens when you're putting out this kind of information. This is very popular among Clear Channel. That's why I'm on Clear Channel right now. Okay, it looks like he's calling in, and I'm going to add to conference. Hello, are you there?
Yeah, hey Jeff, how's it going?
Oh, Dr. John. Okay, Dr. John Hall, Dr. Robert Duncan. Okay, these are the two heavyweights in this the most horrifying topic of all time. You know, electronic harassment, mind control. And to start off with, a lot of people have heard you. I've heard your interview with Alex Ansary on, Coast to Coast on, I'll just start with you, Dr. Robert Duncan. A lot of people know where all this came from, Operation Paperclip, the Nazis, the kind of technological background. But so much is going on today, and I've heard a lot of your stuff from a couple of years ago, but now that we've had the Jared Lee Loughner case, and I just want to ask you about this just right off the bat. I mean, is that potentially a programmed guy?
Oh, absolutely. It's surprising that he even mentioned mind control in his blurb on YouTube. But he very much fits the profile of a programmed assassin. And he was easily discredited in the news, as we saw, as someone who was crazy. And that will sort of explain away what he did. And the motives behind it, his individual motives are going to be different from his controllers' or handlers' motives. And we can only surmise that maybe they want to take away more power, gun rights from the citizens. Well, what do you have? You have more crazy people using guns to commit horrific crimes. You don't know what the political agenda might be, but he's certainly somebody who should be looked at closely as being programmed. He talks about neuro-linguistic programming, which is a form of brainwashing, and programming an assassin. And in the old days, Dr. Ewan Cameron, when he was conducting experiments for the CIA, he used 2-track loops of really negative messaging while the patient was undergoing electroshock and sleep therapy and being given high doses of drugs. And he would try to program a person through this what's called neuro-linguistic programming. The Army uses it as well. And it's a field of study. You can study at MIT. And it's how to control the mind through repetitive statements.
That it's absolutely horrifying to have seen that. But I mean, we all knew that this guy. If you follow his history, he hadn't been really violent. He'd been weird. He'd been an oddball. He'd been definitely someone you could target as somebody weak or that would be able to do killing for somebody, or it could be just we don't know the motives. But I mean, obviously, of all the people in a population, he would stick out as somebody to mess with if you were in the business of controlling people.
Absolutely. And that's one commonality that you can find. We did about 650 interviews of targeted people. And one commonality is that they're usually easily discredited in public. And they stick out as an oddball of some sort. And so, yeah, he would be an easy target for them.
And then you got to wonder the motive. And, the federal judge is shot. But then, other people can be targeted who are not an oddball. Dr. John Hall, enter, please. And here you are. You were targeted, and and there's nothing that I don't think anything about you that would just signal a flag. Oh, come get this guy. He's easy, or he's manipulatable. Let's try it on him.
Well, not until I joined this fight, anyway. Once you start making noise about this technology and joining and combating this, and certainly to some extent you're looked at as an oddball for believing it, for one.
Right.
And especially in medical circles as a physician, the take in the medical community right now is that, you shouldn't be, counseling these people as to being victims, but should be referring them to a psychiatrist for a diagnosis. And that's pretty much the pervasive thinking throughout most of the medical community. There's slowly more physicians coming around to see that there's a problem, and it's not necessarily mental illness now. But I do agree with Dr. Duncan in that most of the people that you see being victimized by this are already social outliers. They're already people that are maybe somewhat involved in the drug counterculture or have other factors in their lives that discredit them already before they ever mention a word about electronic harassment.
Okay, but case in point is your book, A New Breed. Now, I interviewed you when it came out, pretty much. And at that time, there were just a few reviews on it. But you could tell, there were people that were really relieved that you wrote the book, okay, for one. I, for one, was in that category. But then there's others there that would just give you, 1 star and call you and, basically try to defame you. Defamation, very big with these people. Defame you right on that Amazon site. And now I notice that because you hung in there, it's gone the other way, where you have a lot of really positive comments now. The public seems to be accepting your book.
Well, in my situation, it was actually my fiancée who was really more the victim.
Okay.
And we did identify the perpetrators in her case, and a lot of those first reviews were actually traced back to some of the perpetrators themselves. That definitely wanted the book discredited and wanted me discredited, and went to some great lengths to try to accomplish that, and luckily did not. But and the one good thing about Robert Duncan coming out with his book, Soul Catcher Volume 2, my book, I go over we're pretty much of the same mind on how the technology works. My book was more just a story from a credible person that, yes, this is going on. His book goes into detail on how it's done, and has really been a godsend for the victim community.
I'm kind of playing catch up here with everything. I need to get that book ASAP. Dr. Duncan, did you get harassed for writing that book?
No, I actually haven't. It's been very positive feedback.
Get that book.
It almost seems like more public a person is, more they will, stand back because they don't want it to be too obvious. But I haven't had any problems with the publication. And in your introduction, you said it was called Hacking the Human Mind. The title actually changed.
Okay.
It's called Project Soul Catcher, Secrets of Cyber and Cybernetic Warfare Revealed. And the reason that I called it cybernetics, and the field in psychophysics or neuropsychology in cybernetics comes from a Greek word meaning the art of steering. Cybernetics is about having a goal and taking action to achieve that goal. Knowing whether you have reached the goal requires feedback, a concept that comes from cybernetics. And that evolved into the Latin word for governor. And cybernetics as a process operating in nature has been around for a long time, but in society, we've heard it used first by Plato to refer to government. In modern times, the term cybernetics, there was a book written by Mr. Wiener called Cybernetics in 1948, a year after the formation of the CIA. Mm-hmm. His subtitle is important because it connects control systems with communication. And and he also points out in 1948 that both artificial systems and biological systems can have purpose, and this was a scary concept back then. So that's the idea behind cybernetics. Cyber has to do with cyber warfare techniques, hacking computers. Now, there's a kernel, and you can still find this paper in the military literature of the Air Force, that the mind has no firewall. And so the idea is that hacking into computer systems and hacking into human beings, individual minds or society's minds, the collective conscious, use the same techniques and trickery. So the book tries to cover all of those and get into details of some of the systems that are currently out there.
The first stalker that where I became aware of the stalking was through the Scientologists. They seem to be experts at that, and they're really into this whole cybernetics thing and the mind and manipulation of the mind as well.
They are, and it's. I tried to investigate them a little more thoroughly and did a sort of a comparative religion analysis of my own. But for some reason, in all the literature, the word CIA and Scientology seem to be used together, and so I don't.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. Well, I'm just aware.
They've been infiltrated.
What I mean by that is that the whole gaslighting techniques, that were, like Stasi techniques, have been employed by the Scientologists, and I'll share an incident later. We have a question coming from the chat room. Is this type of programming or mind control? In this type of programming or mind control, can they overcome inhibitions in people, or is there some type of pre-programming or pre-screening required for it to work? I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean?
Yeah.
You mean can they use this so you overcome your inhibitions against your will? I think that would be a better question.
Okay, and that's the general question of hypnosis. Now, this is one of the CIA's most famous programs that was leaked during the Frank Church investigations in Congress was a remote hypnotic intracerebral control. So it's a weapon of detrimental hypnosis. And if you talk to some experts, they say under hypnosis, you cannot be forced to do anything that's against your very primitive programming, your morality, your ethics. But obviously they've gone past that. The whole point of some of the CIA programs were to create split personality assassins so that they can commit a crime or finish their mission and then be able to pass a polygraph, but they didn't do it. Yes, they can make you, can change your inhibitions, and that's the whole point of most of these mind control studies, to make the person do things that were normally against their principles.
Yeah, and it's... Go ahead, Jim.
Have you noticed that? But on another point, though, it does seem like we're seeing more individuals that there may, at least it seems to me, that there is a subset of the population that does seem to be a little more resistant to the control mechanisms than others. And my personal opinion is that maybe that is some of the group that's being avidly harassed because maybe they don't respond to the control mechanisms as well as most.
Exactly. I think that's an excellent point.
So they would be targeted more, you're saying?
If they know they can do it to 80% of the population, that's not of their interest. They want to focus on that 20%, what makes them resistant. And that can be both used in analysis of, in terms of warfare, how you make a culture resistant to these techniques in case we get in a war between Russia and China using just psychotronics. Or it can be that they want to improve the weapon's effectiveness, which is the majority, in my opinion, of the cases. And what better targets than those that may show resistance to mind control techniques.
Okay, so those of you who are strong, especially if you have strong faith, I think you see people with strong faith and they're able to discern, and this is another big question, the voice of God from the fake voice of God or the beamed-in voice of God.
Yeah, and that's the problem, that on the one hand, faith does provide a solid foundation for a person not to stray from, but these new voice of God weapons that you can imagine how useful in war that would be. All it commands you to lay down your arms, and you hear this inside your head.
Right.
And then, of course, it's the way God would talk to you. And so, in a way, faith is a double-edged sword. It can make people believe they're talking to an angel, demon, a god, using these weapons, or it can also ground them more to make sure that they're not tricked into doing the devil's work, so to speak.
I got to warn them every day out there, because we are, as much a spiritual broadcast as anything. But today we really want to get into this. We really want to bring people up to date as to what they can do, so they can then prepare themselves. I've been on all kinds of sites lately where I've seen things like tinfoil blankets and tinfoil hats, believe it or not, and I maybe it'll help, but I think in a way, I see a lot of people going to great lengths, almost insane lengths, to keep this stuff out of their rooms, out of their apartments, out of their houses. It can drive a person to doing things that make him look mentally unstable.
And that's the problem, Jeff. A tinfoil hat, the only thing it's going to help you get is a psychiatric diagnosis.
Exactly. And there are other sites that say, look, if you've got this problem, if you're being electronically harassed or, gang stalked on any level, whether from, other human beings to electronic, it all kind of goes together. Because I have been a victim of this myself, and I've been public about it. But there's two schools of thought. One, you be public about it, and that's a good way to get yourself tossed in the loony bin. Of course, I've already been tossed in there, so it's like that was, when I first when I first became aware of organized stalking, I was like 17 years old. Okay, and it was happening then in a more concrete way. I'd say more the gaslighting type way. Okay, and two times. One time I wound up in an overdose in the hospital on where I was given LSD and phenobarbital after I was flipping out from the LSD, and then phenobarbital, and then wound up in a coma. And my heart actually stopped. I came back, but it was, and who was doing it? These were people at in the school that I was going to, and some kids that were there as students and one particular teacher. This had to do with, it's a long story. I can't go into it now. Another time for that testimony. I don't want to take away from this show. Point is it happened to me, and I guess I was targeted for death. I was targeted to be in the mental hospital and then death. You know what I'm saying? I had both. I'm suicidal. I was listed as a suicide. And then actually in the city where I, grew up in L.A., I went back years and years later, had a long history of having to be dealt with by shrinks and all kinds of, I was a complete mess. But anyway, when I got back there and I ran into, say, an old friend, they said, "You're supposed to be dead. I thought you were dead. We all knew you died then." So after that, the rumor went around that I had died. I didn't make it out of that hospital. Okay, that's pretty.
I get a lot of emails from victims who are correspondents that think they're being targeted with the purposes of death. And yes, some TIs do commit suicide to get away from their torture. But all in all, and we'll get Dr. Duncan's take on this, I really don't think that anyone is being specifically targeted with the expectation of them being killed. And mainly because this is experimentation, and dead guinea pigs aren't good to experiment on.
In my case, I don't think it was back then. It was, it's really interesting. The other thing is that I knew all about, a Dr. West, because I had to do back then. You know what I mean? He was kind of part of this whole plot. But anyway, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago. He was the head of the neuropsychiatric, or NPI, at UCLA at the time.
That's right, Jolie West. He's very much involved in all of this.
Yeah, and one of, so it's another story. I wanted to throw it out there to get your take on it. It's a horrible thing. I want to ask you one other thing for either one of you. There was a time in 2004, I believe, I was getting voice to skull, and I know who was doing it. It was someone doing it in a nearby house, and it was the Navy fight song. And the guy worked for Naval Intelligence, or was just retired supposedly from Naval Intelligence. Do you find that to be of any significance?
Here's my take on that. Almost everybody that I've interviewed that has voice to skull believes that it's coming from their neighbors.
Okay.
And so just using some street smarts, I would say that that's a trick. They want you to believe that it's a localized system. But while you were getting it, I bet you could jump on an airplane and fly randomly to another location, and you'd still be getting the voice to skull. So I think the neighbor is just a point of trickery, and that it's not a localized weapon like that.
It's just a guess. I guessed, that was my guess. It wasn't that, and I'll tell you this, I couldn't get away from it, and it went on for about, a couple of weeks, maybe a little longer, and then it went away. And I haven't had it since, but I'm just saying that was pretty bad, because, like I say, it was pretty loud. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, it was very annoying, put it that way, and distracting. And if this went on day after day, it would drive you completely nuts.
Oh yeah,
I've heard from multiple victims in New Mexico that are hearing music and hearing the Navy fight song specifically. So I think that is part of an operation that's being done there.
Wow.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. John, for that, because I carried that since 2004, and I didn't know what to, I didn't understand it.
There is a weapon system that's Sierra Nevada Corporation is coming out with, and probably already has. It's called Medusa, and it's for crowd control, and it uses the microwave hearing effect at near ranges. And basically, you can't plug your ears. You can't stop it. The sound is being transmitted directly to the inner ear through small heating vibrations of the brain. And this was written up probably about 4 years ago that they were developing such a weapon. And there is one colonel that says, if you can transmit voices into the enemy's head, I will find a way to talk them to their death. So you can imagine what a useful weapon system that would be.
Okay. Now, how do they we understand, part of it is to choose stronger victims, but when they want to experiment on this stuff, how do they choose their targets?
Go ahead, Dr. Hall.
Well, I'll give you my opinion on it, and I think it's pretty much random. If you look back historically at the way this research started, most of it was done through front companies or masked as legitimate research through universities. But at least having identified some of the perpetrator groups, with our research, what it appears to me is that the technology is being released to certain, if you want to call them criminal groups or people that are being allowed to have the technology, with basically a carte blanche, open-ended invitation to victimize whoever they want to victimize for whatever reason. And I think that's how the powers that be that are actually taking down the data on how well it works are achieving their randomness to their experimentation. I think the individual groups they're being allowed to possess it are being told, victimize whoever you want to victimize, because if you look across the board, it's certainly random. There's not, it's not one particular racial group, it's not one particular political group. Most of it are common people, housewives. It's not just whistleblowers and political activists. It's, most of the victims are just everyday middle-class people.
Okay. I have another question here. Can they also hear your thoughts while they are implanting their programming or while they're beaming you with something? Do they get feedback?
Absolutely. That's part of the technology that makes it so unbelievable. During hive mining, it's called, their very thought processes are bidirectional. And so you have to create a feedback loop in order for this technology to work. So the answer is a solid yes. Okay,
they can read my thoughts then to a certain extent. During that process of beaming me, they're going to get back some kind of data from me, and it would be involuntary on my part.
That's right. That's right. In fact, you can even probe someone's dreams to get a more subconscious profile of their psychology.
Okay, that is truly horrific. Okay.
Well, you can understand why this is so top secret. The very concept of free will is destroyed. We've been debating this for thousands of years, and to have that argument finalized, well, all of Western philosophy, and from crime and punishment to religion, relies on this concept of free will. They can't just announce it and then say, oh, by the way, we've been running torture experiments on people all around the world. So they're going to be sure to keep this classified for as long as we can.
All right, let's look at the news. Egypt, could they intensify the riots with that gear that they have?
Absolutely, and in fact, it's a major war strategy is to try to get other countries to fight each other. And so you want to intensify the fighting to wage a war of attrition. And then, of course, you could use a political maneuver, say that we're going to send in troops to occupy them to help stop the fighting. There are a whole bunch of reasons you'd want to do that. In 1970s, there was an Army intelligence officer that came forward and said the Russians were beaming us with a cyclotronic signal all over, and we started sending the same one back to them. But the signal was meant to subdue the population, keep them from becoming violent, and calm them down, as if we were the aggressors. So it can be used in either form, to calm a country's population down, or to incite violence as well. Another colonel said that with this particular radio frequency, he could instill white-hot anger in the subject. Well, that would be proof that they already have that technology, and have been, and of course would be using it in a warfare arena.
Yeah, and everywhere else. Could they do something like I read a term, mental rape? And the idea of one of these crimes would be in that kind of environment, used with a satellite for audio and visual. Could scientists, writers, military people, et cetera, have their intellectual property, like their plans or their theories or whatever, their papers, be stolen?
Oh,
And yeah, that's another problem with this technology. In the last chapter of my book, I go through a lot of the current laws and how they have to be rewritten, because the very idea of intellectual property is now defunct. If you can steal someone's property, although I think they were probably, in the term of mental rape, thinking of more severe actions. I mean, literally, there is one simulated rape from an interview of a woman that I did, and so you can cause the same mental harm, trauma to the psyche in a simulated fashion as you can in a physical fashion.
Okay, folks out there.
And we are seeing that, Zeph. I have heard from a lot of victims, female victims, that do get what they call a simulated rape, or, basically, their genitals made to tingle or hurt while they're being hit with, sexual assault images at the same time. That's a pretty common complaint among female victims.
Yeah, we used to be called, incubus, succubus type of demonic activity. Now it's become electronic. In other words, this all that sort of the stuff we would call spiritual warfare has really gone high tech. And it's really, it really is horrifying. But this idea of mental rape is on the rise. Does that mean then that there are necessarily military ops behind the scenes? Could there be rapists in charge of this technology, or having access to it then, just like common criminals? Can they operate these satellites?
You have to define criminal. I think many segments of our government operates as criminals and above the law. No, under the George Bush administration, John Yoo wrote up his torture memos, and it included rape and other things in there that, as long as we as a country do it without taking pleasure in it, then it's not considered part of torture. So my guess is that they're getting around the law that way. And no, I don't think the common, criminal has access to this. I think they're quite trained.
Okay, because see, there's a little debate on that because there's been some information out there that the criminal groups have been able to access somehow through their computers by getting hacked codes or whatever, these satellites, and using them for their own nefarious activities. But you're saying that's probably unlikely.
It's unlikely. The CIA has hired the mafia in the past to try to kill Castro. They're very much utilize each other's networks. But I don't see what the common criminal has to gain by wasting their time torturing, random people, basically. John, what's your take on it?
Well, my take on it is kind of like what you said. I mean, it depends on how you define criminal. And one of the things that worries me in society right now is we're at a point now where we have more people in the private sector with top secret clearances. That most of our intelligence services are being farmed out now, being contracted out to private companies. These are people that got their training in one government agency or another, still maintaining their clearance, but working for private intelligence gathering companies. One of them is based here out of San Antonio called Mantech, and it's well known that they did purchase Igor Smirnov's technology through a third-party company, and they're based right here. So I mean, it's a real fine line between what you call legitimate experimentation or experimentation by the government and criminals accessing it, because these people are still criminals, but they're criminals that have a top-secret clearance. So that end of it, I can see where you could say it has gotten into criminal hands, but these are criminals that were government trained and still have clearances.
Yeah, a guy like Adolf Hitler today, where he used to hire Tibetan remote viewers to go in and try to get information on the enemy or invade and try to kill them remotely. Just think how much fun he'd be having with all this if he were around today. I mean, it's just my feeling is we're at the beginning, not toward the end. What do you think? To me, it seems like this is just gearing up more and more. I mean, I started dealing with this subject, the technology of it, a few years ago, and over all of those years, every year thereafter, it increased. And are we still increasing? And how do you see the future of psychotomics?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a technology that's not going away. Look, one of the whole points of writing the book that I did, and I have another one coming out that gets into the physics and details of the sciences of mind control and cybernetics. This is a technology that's going to be more disruptive to the human race and culture than the internet, airplanes, or cars combined. It's not going away. It's actually a species changer, so it's unfortunately this is our future, and the whole point is to get it out of the wrong hands. Right now, we always use technology for warfare and spying and advantage first. Then the technology can be used for good, and there are many medical purposes for the technology. Technology is neutral, and it's just right now it's being used in such an evil way that we are really afraid of the technology. But there can always be controls over it, like nuclear weapons. It can be regulated. But it's not going away.
Every year it's increased, but now every year I have more and more, I'm in contact with more and more TIs, targeted individuals. And just after, John, after we did our last interview, I met some more that were coming forth. And then I became aware that there are networks out there of TIs, of survivors. And like you said, from every walk of life, basically old, young, the age doesn't seem to matter either. Okay, if someone finds out or thinks that they're a targeted individual, what should they do? And what's the first step?
Well, they should contact one of the organizations out there. Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. Join some support groups. Get some information before they act. Because if they're going to go down the same pathway of trickery that almost every TI goes through, that go to their local police. Well, the police, they don't know anything about it. They're not going to do anything. They'll go to the FBI. They'll get the same response. And so they need to know what works and what doesn't so they don't fall for the common traps. That's my advice.
Okay, John.
I would give the same advice, Zeph, because one thing, Dr. Duncan and I both have spoke to multiple victims, and there's a certain set of programs that they use with each individual, and each individual goes down the same self-destructive pathways when they're exposed to these. And one of the first is that it's coming from the neighbors. So you do something crazy to your neighbors and get arrested and diagnosed, and then once you're further victimized by the psychiatric community, then you're really heading downhill. And then the second one is that there's got to be a chip in me, and I get emails from people every day that the only way this could be happening to me is if I'm chipped. That's actually another falsehood. Are we finding chips in people? Sure we are. Is it a necessity? Absolutely not.
Okay, so that brings new light to the whole abduction phenomenon because it seems to me these two things are related. What are your thoughts on that? We'll start with you, Dr. Duncan. What do you think?
There's no doubt that the government started using cover stories, alien cover stories. Many years ago, they found them to be effective. And so these abductions that have been reported even early in the 60s are most definitely related to this government experimentation program. And they've found a way to automate it and literally ramp it up. And I think that's one reason why we're seeing more TIs. It could be also that more TIs have access to the internet, and that's helping people get together and share notes. But it does look like it's being ramped up.
Yeah, and to me it looks like it's going more toward a societal or a large span of people. Crowd control, the thought control of a nation type of thing. I mean, that's right. It's not going to just be, controlling this one and that one individually. It almost seems like it's got to go nationwide or even worldwide.
This is more effective than normal propaganda. You can affect people while they're sleeping and working. They don't even need to shut off their televisions to get programming. So every country in the world, of course, their goal is to shepherd their people into one conformed thinking pattern. You can look at maybe terrorism as being a milestone to get people to maybe give up the rights, freedom of thought. We got to read everyone's brain print just to make sure they're not a terrorist. So, I think it's definitely heading that direction.
Yeah. Once it gets out of the the sort of beta testing stage, it's going mainstream. It's the pre-crime, that whole Steven Spielberg movie. What was that called, Trish? It wasn't called pre-crime.
Minority Report.
Right, Minority Report. Okay. To me, and then they were using psychics. Well, just replace those psychics with high technology.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And then that's the same movie, and I think some of these movies are kind of prophetic in a way as to, just making predictions of where, especially science fiction. And it looks like this is one pathway they're following. But in the end of that movie, we might recall that, the technology was deemed evil. Ultimately, it didn't help society. When they destroyed that whole place and they destroyed the Department of Pre-Crime, that was the solution. In other words, the good guys won then. But that, as you say, that's not going to be the solution here, because this technology is not going to go away like in that movie. It's going to increase.
There's no way this is going away. The investments, once you understand the how large of a sample set, how much human suffering they've allowed to put into this, developing it, the number of dollars, there's no way they're going to give this up. And this is here to stay. And the people in control that are, I'm sure, so seduced by its power that they rather see the human race go away before this does.
Well, as the big new Brzezinski said, it's easier to kill 1 million people than control them. I guess when he said that, he wasn't taking all this into account.
And you know what? And there is good. This technology is not entirely bad. I mean, looking at things from a medical point of view,
right?
The ability to maybe help with addiction, help with some medical problems with it. Look at the Terry Schiavo case. To determine whether that woman had conscious thought or not. The doctors were having to look at EEG readings that harken back to the 1950s. A bunch of intelligible squiggly lines on paper that really are just about unreadable. They could have put this system on her and knew if she had conscious thought within minutes. I mean, so there is some good things that can come out of this technology. Just as Dr. Duncan said, it's not being used in that manner.
Okay. Right. I understand there's a positive aspect, but I think in a way we have to go through like a trial by fire as a culture. In other words, we're going to go through this ugly time first. And where we come out on the end of this ugly time, it's anyone's guess. But those of you who are TIs, again, you know who you are. Could I say this? If you think you are, you might be. And what are the statistics on that for people who think they are? How many of them turn out to actually be targeted individuals?
I'm sure it's a gray scale. When you say targeted, it's often black and white. I'm sure they're in the experimentation. There are people we found that just get B2K, and the B2K is only positive, although that's a rare case. Usually it's always negative messaging. Some people get tortured. Some people get both. And it runs the gamut. So you can imagine if you're trying to test a new drug, you want a random sample and you want to pull out all the different variables. And it's called discriminant function analysis. And so you want to test it on different people in different types of variations of the hypnosis, of the mind control, of the stalking, and to see what is most effective.
Well, again, people that have, if you don't think those thoughts are your thoughts, and you keep getting these negative thought patterns, or even, like you say, positive thought patterns. I had a vision from God. I have all this going on, or I have a new pathway. I suddenly, or I want to commit suicide or something. I mean, do you go to the suicide group, and then you realize it's not your thought, but you feel like you're being beamed? Do you go to the suicide support group, or do you go to the TI support group? I mean, if you go to the suicide support group and you say, I'm getting all these thoughts beamed into my head, they're going to think you're a schizophrenic right off the bat.
Oh, yeah. You'll be labeled immediately. Yeah, and that's a given. And then you'll be given drugs that may or may not help. So that's a difficult question. The victims that I've studied, they almost all got the full-on testing, so there was no doubt that they were TIs. So people that may just be getting brought into the program, well, maybe if they know too much, the program won't be effective, and they'll give up on them. So these radio shows and books are very important, at least in my mind, to spoil and ruin a lot of their data that they're gathering.
Okay. Well, this is, unfortunately for some of you, this may be a painful topic, but, you need to get the information. There is help out there. These are, groups, and I suppose they have to be self-policing because there could be infiltrators into those groups, those support groups for being a TI. If you feel they are on the internet, you can get information. I've got a couple of resources here, and let me see what you guys think about this. It's freedomfchs.com. Freedom from...
covert harassment and surveillance.
Okay, that would be a good one. Raven1.net. I guess she was Eleanor White was really the first one I ever read that had even dealt with this subject. And mindjustice.org is another one. Americans thought control, mind control, disinformation, and other naughty things by Moss David Posner. I guess that's some sort of report. Microwave harassment and mind control experimentation, and Federation Against Mind Control Europe. Another one is the study of U.S. intelligence community human rights violations and continuing research in electromagnetic weapons. That's a PDF document. And I want to know, Dr. Duncan, where can we get your books? Amazon?
Amazon.com. Secrets of Cyber and Cybernetic Warfare. The title is Project Soulcatcher.
Okay, I'm going to have those links and the pictures of those books when we produce the show as a podcast. I will have all of that. You click on the picture, you'll go right to the link. You can go there and get the book. Otherwise, is there any other bookseller? I'm sure would have. If you don't have internet, you can just call up whoever go to your Borders bookstore or go to your Barnes and Noble or one of those, and you can order it there, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, you can get any book anytime. There's no excuse not to get a book. Is there an e-book available?
Right now, no, not for my books. I am thinking of putting it on Kindle, but it's not on there yet.
Okay. Now, do you have a website? I've looked and I found one that was all Chinese. But I can't understand this.
There actually is a Chinese support group called Peace Pink, and they have their electromagnetic groups, experimentation groups there, support groups. There's one in Russia as well. I do not have a website. I don't have time to maintain it. I know Dr. Hall does.
I know, and I've got that on the site. That's satweapons.com, right?
.com. And if anybody has any questions about Dr. Duncan's book, you can email me through that website, and I can certainly pass on the information on where to get his book. It is a must-read to understand this technology. I'm a medical doctor. Compared to him, I'm definitely a fat girl at this prom. So, if you really want to
come on, that's
being
me. No. Look, I need both. Okay, I need the new breed. I need a new breed. Satellite Terrorism in America by Dr. John Hall, and I need to also read Dr. Duncan to get the whole, by Dr. Robert Duncan to get the entire, the other side. I need both sides of this, the personal side, the technological side, where these, and also Dr. John Hall, you are involved with targeted individuals, with helping them, because I know quite a few that they've contacted you and gotten help that way.
Yeah, I work with a lot of people, at least trying to get them to go down some of the same pathways that we've talked about, because invariably they think it's their upstairs neighbor or the neighbor across the street, and it's mainly trying to explain the technology to them so they don't do something to victimize themselves.
In my case, the neighbor moved away after I prayed that they would move away.
But it didn't stop after that, did it?
No, it didn't stop. But then it did stop, And then I had somebody actually email me and say he was doing it from Australia, but he was lying. I knew that. I got the impression that he was just making, because I'd mentioned it on a broadcast. See what I mean? So someone steps up and go, I was doing that to you, and he apologized for having sent those kind of messages. But then what I realized later was, now this was a definite thing, just like you turn on a light switch, that you turn on your stereo or TV. It was like that. No, but again, it's been many years. I've been left alone. So am I free? Either one. Am I free now that I've been left alone? I haven't had that experience for a few years.
Time will tell.
Oh, okay.
I've heard of other people that have been released for a time, and then they're brought back into the project. So don't give up the fight just because you may be free.
Well, what I'm trying to do with my situation is I'm trying to bring logic to it. I'm trying to bring a better understanding. Just for this is a personal show for me, because I'm trying to understand. Because I know that a lot of the time I've been quiet. At one point, I was pretty wild on go. I went out live on the internet in 2002, and that probably saved my life. But I was pretty out there in terms of explaining stuff that was happening to me. And one guy that was a listener, he was a doctor, and he gave me a clean bill of health and a clean bill of mental health, and then signed it as a legal document, because he said, you might need this if they try to throw you in the loony bin. So obviously I made the mistake, but I didn't know what else to do. I was all alone. I didn't know what else to do. So I went forward on the internet thinking that, that's what I should do. And nothing happened to me. In other words, I survived, obviously, And
that's the fight we're trying to fight right now, too, is to educate the psychiatric community that this technology does exist. Because at the very top, American Psychiatric Association, they damn well know that this technology exists. At the community level, the psychiatrist that you're going to be sent to in your hometown probably is largely ignorant of the technology and is just going to fulfill the requirements of the DSM-IV to give you a diagnosis. And that's up to us to change that through education.
Well, when they diagnosed me, I had everything I had all kinds of like paranoia and borderline personality and all kinds of terms, that just explained that I couldn't really function in society because, I was getting interrupted, if you will. But anyway, I've also tried to understand how this works together with the demonic and the satanic, because there are people, I think we would all agree, walking around as programmed, it seems, by demons. They're just not the same as who they were, and they're in need of an exorcism. What say you, either one, about exorcism today and deliverance?
Well, I can't talk to the spiritual level, but there is a weapon system discussed in my book called Satan, and it stands for Silent Assassination Through Adapting Networks. So you can imagine you have a behavioral modification tool weapon. You can have dial-in lethality simply by manipulating the humans themselves to hurt themselves. And it uses all the best medical discoveries except in the negative. Fire can be used to keep people warm and heat food, kill bacteria, or it can be used to burn down villages. And so this is an extreme example of weaponization of the medical profession.
Okay. Well, so if anyone feels they're targeted, there are support groups. Do you think these support groups are legit? How do you know that? Okay, here's a good question. How would you know something is wrong with a support group?
There are many things wrong with most of the support groups, and that's just natural dysfunctionality. People are on edge. People are being tortured. And yes, maybe you'll find an infiltrator who is trying to stir the pot for no reason. But I found that the support groups, they can be helpful. You get information, but you can get sucked into them, and they become infighting. And unfortunately, you're bringing together people of all walks of life under duress. You're going to have a lot of that infighting.
Well, I don't mind that. What I mind is that, it becomes another experiment. That
in a way it is. It's what they study in the intelligence agencies is how to develop relationships. This is published in DARPA as one of their projects with lifelong understanding of the development of relationships, as well as how to disrupt human networks. So you can imagine, that, yes, they probably are part of an experiment.
Well, all right. Look, we're just about out of time. Again, Dr. Robert Duncan, I thank you so much for being here. You don't have a website. The books, I will have those links, Amazon.com, and Dr. John Hall. As always, Dr. John Hall also is a broadcaster and has, you've got a whole venture there, but you can contact him. I'll get more links up on our show so they can follow your shows as well. You've done a lot, Dr. Hall. You've done a lot in terms of, being an activist out there, and and a lot of people really look up to you, and they're just really thankful that you came forward. But you are a leader among men, as it were. You're out there bringing awareness to this. But we're all out of time. I thank you both for being here, and God bless.
Thank you for having me.
And God bless both of you. Okay, and I'm going to be catching up. Thank you so much. I've got to let these guys go, and that's it on our interview. And what do you think? Pretty amazing, huh? Zeph Daniel, and I have no time to explain anything. I just have to get out of here. We love you. We're praying for you, and we'll see you next time. Okay? All right. Until we meet again next week, you short wavers and you people with iTunes. Get in there. It's the link is right on our site. ZephDaniel.com will take you there. We're all out of time. And, hey, look, chin up. There's help. These guys are very brave going forward with what they're doing. But today we brought you pretty much the cutting edge of what it is. Okay? It is what it is.